Brought to you by the Las Cruces Sun News. This is Straight Shooter. What is going on, everybody? This is Justin Martinez, aka Jay the Sports Dude. And if you are listening right now, let me just say thank you for tuning in to Straight Shooter, the podcast where I shoot from the hip and give you everything that you need to know about the New Mexico State men's basketball team. This is episode 15 of our season-long journey. So if you're a returning listener, then welcome back. I missed you. And if you're new to the program, well, then welcome to the family. Where have you been all my life? Guys, we have a lot to talk about today, so sit back and relax because I got you. I'm coming to you from a place that I like to call the saloon. So bartender, what do we have on tap for today?
On tap today is a recap of the Aggies game against Tarleton State and UTRGV, Week 9 WAC predictions, and a preview of the Dixie State series.
Alrighty, thank you, bartender. I have my lasso in hand, and it's time for our post-game roundup, the segment where I round up my thoughts on the most recent New Mexico State games. And in this case, the Aggies split their road series against Tarleton State this past Friday and Saturday, winning Game 1 by a score of 78-51, and then losing Game 2 by a score of 64-55. New Mexico State then faced UTRGV on Tuesday and earned a 69-51 victory, which puts the team at 8-7 on the season, 5-6 in WAC play. And I have my takeaways from the three contests. Let's go ahead and get started with takeaway number 1, which is that the Aggies need to have a presence in the paint. New Mexico State dominated down low in its 78-51 win over Tarleton State on Friday, recording 30 points in the paint. It definitely helped that the team also went 13 for 22 from deep in that one, which is 59.1%. But we saw on Saturday that they can't rely on that long-range shooting. The Aggies went 9 for 33 from distance, which is 27.3%. And instead of working it down low, they just kept shooting three-pointers. New Mexico State only recorded 14 points in the paint against a Tarleton State team that doesn't have the most size, and that just can't happen. I get it, the Aggies like to shoot their threes. It's a big part of the system. I know that. But when you're only shooting 31% in that department this season, which is the lowest percentage of any Aggie team since the 1995-96 squad, by the way, finding that balance with your post presence is crucial. If New Mexico State makes the three-point shots, then that's a huge plus. The team definitely becomes more dangerous, but it needs something else to fall on when those shots aren't dropping. And now we have takeaway number 2, which is that Jabari Rice has to play at that preseason WAC Player of the Year level if New Mexico State wants to make a postseason run. The redshirt junior struggled against Tarleton State this past weekend, averaging 5.5 points and 3 turnovers per game on 4 for 17 shooting from the floor, which is 23.5%. He just couldn't seem to get it going in either contest, but that changed on Tuesday against UTRGV. Rice recorded 16 points, 8 rebounds, 2 blocks, and 2 steals while shooting 46.2% from the floor. He was a stat sheet stuffer, and he just played at a level of intensity that was unmatched all game long. It's no secret that the Aggies are far from a clear favorite to win the WAC tournament this season, but the pieces are there at the end of the day, and the biggest one has to be Jabari Rice. So we'll see if he can lead his team back to the top of the conference hierarchy. And now it's time for my big takeaway of the day, and it's that this New Mexico State team has some fight to it. I'll admit it, folks, I did not think the Aggies would be able to beat UTRGV on Tuesday. The team was coming off of what was, in my opinion, its most disappointing outing of the season in that loss to Tarleton State, and it was missing a number of players as well, which I'll get into in a second here. But New Mexico State played with a fire that we just haven't seen out of them on a consistent basis this season. The Aggies recorded 19 offensive rebounds to UTRGV's 10. They forced 16 turnovers, and they held the Vaqueros to 18 for 41 shooting from the floor, which is 36.7%. It was easily one of New Mexico State's best outings of the year, and that's what it's going to take this weekend when the team faces Dixie State, because there's a good chance it'll be shorthanded once again. Donnie Tillman missed the UTRGV game due to a non-COVID related health issue. Gerald Dokes has been out since the Utah Valley series for that same reason, and Wilfred Lakai hasn't played since that series against the Wolverines due to concussion protocol. All 3 players are game time decisions for this weekend, and if some or all of them are unable to suit up, New Mexico State needs to bring that same intensity that it had in that game against the Vaqueros if it wants to win. Alrighty, folks, so that buzzer means it's time for segment number 2, which are my Week 9 WAC predictions. Last week I went 4-3 in my picks. I had a split for the UTRGV and Utah Valley series, which ended up being a Wolverine sweep. I then had a split for the Grand Canyon and Seattle series, which is what happened. And finally, I had New Mexico State sweeping Tarleton State and losing to UTRGV, but the Aggies ended up splitting with the Texans and beating the Vaqueros. So that puts me at 29-9 on the season, not too shabby. And now it's time to take a look at this week's matchups, of which there are 4 of them. We're going to get started with Tarleton State at UTRGV. The Texans are 8-10 on the season, 3-7 in WAC play, and they're fresh off a split against New Mexico State. One guy who really stood out for the Texans was Shamir Bogues, a 6'4" freshman guard who averaged 10.5 points and 2.5 rebounds per game against the Aggies on 56.3% shooting from the floor. Bogues really doesn't play with any fear despite being a true freshman, and considering he's averaging 7.5 points and 2.1 steals per game, I think he's going to be in contention for WAC Freshman Player of the Year with a guy like Seattle's Kobe Williamson. The top dog on Tarleton State is still undoubtedly Montre Gibson, but it looks like the junior guard has found his backcourt partner of the future. Then there's UTRGV. The Vaqueros are also fresh off a game against New Mexico State, although they suffered a 69-51 loss in that one. Jeff Ochiri had a solid outing. The 6'11" grad transfer from Stony Brook recorded a season-high 11 points to go along with 5 rebounds and 3 blocks. Now those 3 rejections are the norm for him. Despite only averaging 15.4 minutes per contest, he's leading the WAC in blocks per game at 2.5. Javon Levi also had an uncharacteristic game. He's normally one of the better passers in the country, but he recorded 0 assists against the Aggies to go along with 8 points. We'll see if he can get going this weekend because UTRGV needs him to run this offense. The deciding factor in this series is going to be which offense breaks first. Both of these teams are defensive minded and they love to force turnovers that lead to points on the other end. UTRGV ranks 4th in the country in opponent turnover percentage at 24.8%, and Tarleton State is not far behind. The Texans rank 17th in that department at 22.9%. We'll see which team can take better care of the basketball. I think it'll be a good series, so I'm going with the split. Now let's move on to our next series, which is Seattle at Cal Baptist. The Redhawks are 10-9 on the season, 3-4 in WAC play, and they split their most recent series against Grand Canyon, winning game 1 by a score of 63-57, and then losing game 2 by a score of 81-71. I said that Kobe Williamson would be the X factor for Seattle in last week's episode, and that turned out to be the case. The freshman recorded a career-high 14 points in Friday's win over the Lopes, and that sort of production is big because Darion Trammell and Riley Grigsby normally provide a big bulk of the Redhawks' scoring, so you'll take whatever you can get from that supporting cast. We saw what happens when the role players don't help out much in game 2 against Grand Canyon. Trammell and Grigsby combined for 53 points, but no other player reached double digits, and Seattle suffered an 81-71 loss. Then there's Cal Baptist. The Lancers are 12-8 on the season, 5-5 in WAC play, and they earned a 78-65 win over Vanguard, which is an NAIA team, on Saturday. Ty Rowell and Reed Nottage led the way in that one, really to nobody's surprise. Each player racked up 22 points, and they continue to be one of the most potent duos in the WAC. They're averaging 31 combined points per contest, which is second only to the duo, coincidentally, of Trammell and Grigsby at 38 points per game. That leads us perfectly into the deciding factor for this series, and it's which team supporting cast can provide the most production. Aaron Nettles is capable of lighting it up for Seattle when he gets hot from deep. Gorjak Gat can really change the game for Cal Baptist when he's going to work down low. These two teams lean on their stars as much as anyone in the conference, so we'll see if either one of them can get some help. And now let's move on to our series of the week, which is Utah Valley at Grand Canyon. This series will decide who wins the regular season WAC title, so it's definitely the matchup everybody has been waiting for. The Wolverines are 10-9 on the season, 8-3 in WAC play, and they're fresh off a sweep of UTRGV. Vardaz Amac bounced back after struggling against New Mexico State in the prior series. The 6'11" redshirt sophomore averaged 19 points and 14.5 rebounds per game against the Vaqueros. He did shoot 40.6% from the floor, which isn't quite up to his standards, but Utah Valley will definitely take that production. Then there's Grand Canyon. The Lopes are 14-5 on the season, 8-2 in WAC play, and they're coming off a split against Seattle. Javon Blacksher Jr. really bounced back in Saturday's win after struggling in Friday's loss. The sophomore guard recorded 5 points and 5 turnovers while shooting 2 for 14 from the floor in game 1, which is 14.3%, but he racked up team highs of 17 points, 7 assists, and 3 steals in game 2. As much as the frontcourt duo of Abjorn Midgard and Alessandro Lever lead the way in terms of scoring, Blacksher is still the guy who keeps the engine running since he's one of the best facilitating guards in the WAC, so the Lopes definitely need him to be on his A-game this weekend. The deciding factor in this series is undoubtedly going to be that battle down low between Grand Canyon's Abjorn Midgard and Utah Valley's Vardaz Amac. These are the two best big men in the conference, and I believe the front runners for the WAC Player of the Year award. It's the matchup of the season and the series of the season, which I believe will end in a split. So that is going to do it for our look around this week's WAC matchups. We still have one more on the docket though, which is New Mexico State's road series against Dixie State. I'm about to preview that in segment number 3. And full transparency, folks, this segment was recorded directly off of my laptop as opposed to using my regular recording setup. You'll see the reason for that in a second here, but that's why it does sound a little bit different. I apologize for that. Either way, let's go ahead and get into it with this preview. Alrighty, guys, so that buzzer means it's time for our third and final segment of the day, which is a preview of New Mexico State's 2-game road series against Dixie State on Friday and Saturday in St. George, Utah. Tip-off time for both contests is 7 p.m. Mountain Time. And here to help me preview the matchup is Chris Kwasensky, a sports reporter for The Spectrum, who covers an array of teams, including the Dixie State men's basketball squad. Chris, thanks so much for finding time to join me. How are you doing today? I know it's been a busy one for you, right?
Yeah, it's been kind of busy, but it's a lot of the work that we enjoy. And it's if you're busy, that means you're doing work. It means you're having fun. So thanks for having me on.
Yeah, happy to have you on. I figure who knows more about this team than you, definitely more than me. So I really appreciate you helping kind of steer me in the right direction for this preview here.
Yeah, well, yeah, this is a fun team to watch. Dixie State is going to be a fun WAC team once they start getting some of that D1 talent under their wings. But either way, it's a fun team to look at, especially now from a little bit of a distance.
Yeah, definitely. And even in their first year, a couple of impressive wins, 8-11 on the season, 4-8 in WAC play, and fresh off a split against Tarleton State. One of the guys who really jumps out on the stat sheet when I look at it is Cameron Gooden, a 5'11" junior who's averaging team highs of 12.9 points and 3.2 assists per game. What is it about this guy that makes him so impactful for Dixie State?
I think he's just a natural D1 point guard. He's a guy that took the JUCO route, and that's been Dixie State's calling card for a while in the D2 process. But they haven't been able to pull an athlete like Cam. Like, he's so good off the dribble. You see how quick he is. He can also shoot from 3 too. He's got that full array of talents that you want in a Division I point guard. And I think it's important to note that he's one of those first actual D1 players to be a part of this roster. Like, if you look at it now, obviously there's going to be time to transition, and that's just to be expected. But with Cam, that's a first good start, because you need a point guard. You need a guy who knows how to run a team, run an offense. Mm-hmm. He can do that, and I think it's important to note, especially now, since all you need to do, if you're Coach John Judkins, you can start recruiting, the big man. You can start recruiting a 3-point shooter. You can recruit the other parts of the team,
right,
that you don't necessarily have. But he's one of those guys that is going to be a fixture at Dixie State.
Yeah, definitely. And one of the things that also makes him a constant threat is the fact that he can get to the free throw line really at will. Something that's pretty surprising, that he ranks 5th in the WAC in free throw rate. So we'll see if he can get to the charity stripe this weekend. And really kind of his right-hand man, part of that dynamic duo, is Hunter Scofield, a 6'8" senior who's averaging 12.5 points and a team-high 5.8 rebounds per game while shooting 48.7% from the floor. He was a guy that was a preseason all-WAC second-team selection, and he's been big for the Trailblazers this year, right?
Yeah, he's been one of those guys that took a second to kind of acclimate to the D1 level, if that makes sense. He started the season, I don't want to say a little bit out of shape, but he looked a little slower than he did last year. That might have been because of some of the COVID stuff that was going on, some of the things that restricted workouts, restricted the team kind of getting together. And I know he did suffer some injuries too, that he might have gotten injured, which kind of hampered a little bit of how he prepared for the season. But if you ask him, he's gotten to where he is now, and he's really worked for it. It's a guy that you have to give him credit. He found a way to work his talents into the D1 level. I think that's important to note, especially as that's a guy that Judkins loves. He loves getting the ball to him. He loves that he's a guy he can depend on in the post to get rebounds, because Judkins wants to win the rebounding battle every game. A guy like Hunter, who's athletic too, that's a good place to start, especially when you're looking against some of the other games that he's played against Tarleton State too. He matched up with those guys pretty well. He's strong and had a little bit more strength than some of those post guys. He's a little more athletic too. So when it came against some like Utah Valley, you saw how he dropped over 30 points in that contest too. So, I mean, he's a guy that he's finally getting back into his rhythm, or it started to finally get back to his rhythm at the start of February. You see how it's paid off in dividends.
Yeah, definitely. You mentioned that start to the season, he was a little bit in and out of the starting lineup. But as you said, February especially is when he's really started to pick it up. In that month, he averaged 15.2 points per contest while shooting 48.5% from the floor. So really good basketball out of him. That's kind of the big duo there. But who are some other guys that maybe you need to keep an eye out for when you're watching Dixie State?
I'd say Isaiah Pope is a guy, because when I mentioned Cam Gooden is a dude who is a D1 player now, I think Isaiah Pope is there too. Mm-hmm. He's a guy he's got a great stroke from three. He tied the school record for threes in a game in the second game against Tarleton State. with 6, and when he's on, he's on. And offensively, he's an athlete. He's tall. He's also he's got a little bit of range to him, and it really helps him out, especially on the defensive end too. He's a guy that Judkins really wants to see take the next step next year. I could see him being a guy playing, tag teaming with Cam, as Cam is the point guard, kind of drives the ball up the court, but he's a guy that can set up the offense and can really run through him point wise. And other than that, Andre Mulabea is a guy that Judkins has really helped, or really just trusted. He's a freshman, and you don't really see that, especially out of a Judkins team. He's a guy that has really taken talent and taken the time to develop talent across the years that they've played. And he's really putting some trust in young guys now. And I think that's interesting to note, especially as you get into the latter portion of the year, as you start to see guys really starting to come back from injuries, starting to come back and all that stuff. And I guess it's just part of the adaptation that even Judkins has to do with being a D1 coach now. And it's interesting. You see how the team is kind of going, taking tests, taking hits, the way that they've gotten blown out in games and then have turned around and blown out other teams, or have gotten wins to split a series. It's kind of frustrating because they don't really know why that's the case. But that's also just the frustrations of being a first-year D1 team, and players like Mulabea ease those pains. Same with Pope and that kind of stuff. And it really sets them up for next year as they kind of have these younger players that can take the next step. And I think it's interesting, especially, like I said, with Judkins being more of a senior guy. He's figuring out that young players can ball too. And it's part of the learning process.
Yeah, definitely good to have that balance kind of between that senior leadership, that veteran leadership, and also some guys that can maybe learn from them and then carry the torch eventually. And now we'll look at New Mexico State, 8-7 on the season, 5-6 in WAC play, fresh off a win over UTRGV on Tuesday, 69-51. One of those guys who really stepped up was Jabari Rice. He actually struggled against Tarleton State, averaged 5.5 points and 3 turnovers per game in that series. But he bounced back against the Vaqueros, 16 points, 8 rebounds, 2 blocks, 2 steals. He did still have those 4 turnovers, so something to monitor, but a great sign for the Aggies. Christus, how do you see Dixie State faring against Rice? Because I know they are last in the WAC in points allowed per game at 76.8, so not a stifling defense. But is there a guy who you think will be able to hang with them, or is it going to be more so by committee? Just what are you expecting out of that matchup?
It's interesting. I think the first game is always like a feel-out game for Judkins. And I don't know if that's played into a part of how they've lost the first game and then rallied to take the second and that kind of stuff. But I think there's part of it. Part of the approach to a player like that is difficult, especially since these are some of the best players that Judkins has ever coached against at the D1 level. I mean, Rice he's a dude. That's a genuine scorer right there. I mean, he's a guy that can do everything that you need to win. And Judkins is trying to scheme against that. And I'm sure he's got a good game plan right up there right now. But I would say it's probably by committee. I know Judkins can do a myriad of things at defense. You might see him slip into a little bit of a zone sometimes. Might go man to man. Might try different things. It all just depends on how he's feeling. He's trying new things now, especially with some of the athletes he has. And I wouldn't be surprised if it is by committee. I wouldn't be surprised if they decide, go to zone and make him earn it by far just by shooting the ball, or go man and see if you can have a guy that can go straight up with him. So I think they could do a myriad of things against a guy like that.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the benefits of a 2-game series with these being back-to-back days. This kind of format sort of leans itself to just who is the team that's better at adjusting and being able to correct some mistakes from game one, because that really is going to be a feel-out game, that first one, right?
Oh, yeah, it usually always is. And you can see some of the stuff that they do. Dixie State does at least, and how they can just course correct and do it the second game. And one of the big things is rebounding. I've seen some games this year where Dixie State they just lose the rebounding battle, and that's not something that obviously Judkins like to see. No coach likes to see that, but it plays directly into the success that Dixie State has if they can win the rebounding battle. And I think that's important, especially now with Hunter coming back. A big thing to watch is if Jared Green and Jacob Nichols get back. Those are 2 forwards that are 2 scrappy guys that can get rebounds in creative ways and can really help push that rebounding battle. And in that way, that's just how they play, and if they can get full strength into this game, I think that feeling out game will be more of a challenge for New Mexico State, especially if Dixie State can win that and then can learn really turn to end the season on a good note, because they haven't really had that this year where they've swept the team and said, okay, we're looking for this is great. We finally have a bunch of momentum. If they could do that, I think that sets them up great, not just for a recruiting cycle, but for a summer where they say, hey, we can hang with guys, because New Mexico State's been circled on their calendar forever.
Mm-hmm. Definitely. Yeah. I mean, that's kind of something New Mexico State has been facing these past few years, is that target on their back is as big as any team in the conference. So for sure, even if a team isn't necessarily eligible for postseason play, stuff like that, you better believe they're going to want to beat New Mexico State. That's going to be one of those kind of statement games for them. But I guess also looking at a little bit more at the Aggies, they got a big boost off the bench game against UTRGV. CJ Roberts, 12 points, 6 rebounds. He actually is at double-digit points in 4 of his last 5 outings, while shooting 47.1% from deep. So he's really providing some much-needed bench scoring, while Wilfred Lakai has been out with concussion protocol. And that's kind of been something New Mexico State has been dealing with a lot lately, is injuries. Lakai isn't one of the only guys whose availability is up in the air this weekend. Donnie Tillman missed the UTRGV game due to a non-COVID-related health issue, and Gerald Dokes has been out since the Utah Valley series due to that same reason. So plenty of question marks for New Mexico State, but obviously it's still a dangerous team. I know you talked about the rebounding. Would you say that is the biggest thing that Dixie State has to do if it wants to win? Is that kind of the key for this team?
I think part of it's rebounding, but also I think another part of it is just playing a cohesive game. Sometimes you might have guys that try to do a little too much offensively. You might have a guy like Cam Gooden might try to be that guy who's going to do it all himself, or you might get a guy like Hunter, if he's on the 3-point line, if he's open, he might take a shot instead of trying to maybe work the ball in a little bit more and draw a foul. Or it really just depends on what Dixie State team is going to come out there. And I think at this point of the year, I think they know that the better, or I guess more together they play, the better they play. So I wouldn't be surprised and see a team come out with that resolve, especially like I said, they can come out and get 2 wins here. Like that's huge for that program. That's something that they can hang their hats on going into the offseason, and especially since they can't play in the tournament, they're going to be watching the WAC play in Vegas in a couple of weeks. So it's one of those things where they'll take a plus wherever they can get it. And if they can win the rebounding battle this weekend, they're going to take that. If they can, shoot over 50% from the floor, they'll definitely take that too. But if Judkins can look at the film and say, hey, we played good basketball here, I think that's something he's definitely looking forward, especially against a good team like New Mexico State.
Yeah, definitely. And on the flip side, I think the really big key for New Mexico State is to keep Dixie State off the free throw line. Something I thought was pretty crazy. In the 4 WAC games the Trailblazers have won, they've attempted an average of 23.3 free throw attempts per contest, while shooting 82.8% in that department. In addition to not wanting to give up free points, the Aggies also definitely don't want to get guys into foul trouble, because there's a good chance they're going to be shorthanded for this series. We'll see if they can play good, clean defense this weekend. And now I got to put you on the spot here, Chris. What are you predicting for this series? Will it be a sweep or a split? Just what are you thinking for this one?
I'm thinking a split, just because I don't know if Jared Green and Jacob Nichols are going to be back. I do know a couple guys are coming back, a couple athletic guards, and it might take them a little bit of time to get back and acclimated because they haven't played in a while. But I mean, I could see this being one of those splits like the Tarleton State series, where Dixie State comes out and just falters a little bit in the first game. You see some of the mistakes that they're making, but things that you can just correct pretty easily. And Judkins is a good coach. He knows how to correct that kind of stuff. So he can turn around and correct that, like we saw against Tarleton State, where I can't remember what they scored in the first game against Dixie State. It was something over 75, 80 points. And then the next game, they held Tarleton to under 50. So it's one of those things where if you course correct and you can figure out how to do that quickly, especially with the back-to-back, I think that Dixie State can win the second one. It'll be a tough first matchup, though. It's kind of going in blind, especially after a week off. There might be a little bit of rust going there, but they'll be ready to play.
Yeah, definitely. I got to say, I didn't think New Mexico State would beat UTRGV on Tuesday just because of the injury that the team is dealing with. But the Aggies really proved me wrong with one of their better outings of the season. Had that game not been rescheduled, I think I probably would have gone with a split as well against Dixie State. But it's given me just enough confidence to say the Aggies will get the sweep. But some really good basketball. I think game 1, Aggies 73-68, and then on Saturday 79-70. Still, it could definitely go either way. The Aggies haven't been known to come out of the gates in their first game of the series, so they might be able to catch the Aggies just on a bit of an off day on that first one. I think that's probably their better chance to win, just if you're going based off the history of the Aggies as of late. But definitely, I think a split would be big for Dixie State just to kind of get them that momentum heading into next season, like you said, right?
Yeah, and right now, I mean, this team is they know that the future is what's important here. I just talking to not just the coaching staff, but some members of the athletic department, and they go back to some of the games this year, like when they played Gonzaga. Like they really knew they weren't going to win that game unless Gonzaga shot like 40 from the floor, or if they shot like 20 from three, or if some of the big stars on that team went down with injuries and that kind of stuff. But or even going against Southern Utah, I know a team that they're really forging a rivalry with. Come the time that SU goes into the WAC, like they didn't know if they were going to win that game. They said one of the best case scenarios was giving them a scare, and they did that. They put them on notice and that kind of stuff, and they say, hey, we're here too. We can play with the D1s just like you can. And they're thinking of the future in every single way. So that's why any kind of benefit, any kind of just good basketball, really anything this weekend is going to be huge for this team. So
yeah, definitely some good basketball ahead for Dixie State. But that is going to do it for episode 15 of Straight Shooter. Chris, again, thank you so much for joining me today. Glad we can get you on the show, man.
Yeah, thanks for having me on, man.
Yeah, for sure. And there you have it, folks. If you enjoyed this episode, please leave a like, share it with the rest of Aggie Nation, and consider subscribing or following, depending on what platform you're listening to this on. If you guys want to stay up to date with all things Aggie Hoops, make sure to follow me on Twitter at @JTheSportsDude, and give Chris a follow as well while you're at it. That's at @OchoK_. Don't forget to also subscribe to the Las Cruces Sun News. Guys, this has been Justin Martinez, aka @JTheSportsDude. I'll see you guys next Wednesday. I'm out.